After 15 years working at the same manufacturing plant, saving every extra dollar, I had finally done it. 5 acres of land with a modest 3-bedroom farmhouse, just far enough from town to feel peaceful but close enough for convenience. My own little piece of heaven with room for the small hobby farm I had always dreamed about. The property sat on the outskirts of Meadow Creek, backing up to farmland on one side and bordering the pristine Oak Ridge estate subdivision on the other. The previous owner had let the place get run down, which is why I could afford it. The house needed a new roof. The barn was practically falling apart. The fencing around the property was mostly missing or damaged beyond repair, but none of that mattered. It was mine, free and clear, no mortgage hanging over my head. I spent that first summer fixing up the house, making it weather-tight and comfortable before the winter came. By spring, I turned my attention to the exterior. I repainted the faded siding a warm honey yellow. I rebuilt the rotting front porch, and I started planning for my small herd of goats and chickens. That meant proper fencing, including an electric component to keep out the coyotes that roamed the area. Nothing fancy or dangerous, just standard agricultural fencing with a single electric wire near the top. I researched county regulations, pulled the proper permits, and made sure everything was up to code. From my back porch, I could see Oak Ridge Estates in the distance. It was a stark contrast to my weathered farmhouse. Perfect rows of luxury homes with matching roof lines. Manicured lawns cut to exactly the same height. The entrance featured an elaborate stone sign with a waterfall. I had driven through once out of curiosity and noticed the small plaques in each yard displaying the approved paint color names. Not my cup of tea, but to each their own. My nearest neighbor within Oak Ridge was about a quarter-mile away, but occasionally residents would walk or jog along the road that separated our properties. Most were friendly, offering a wave as they passed by. Some even stopped to chat, curious about my renovation progress or the chickens I had recently acquired. "Those fresh eggs must be wonderful," a middle-aged man named Tom had commented one morning as he jogged in place. "My wife and I had chickens before moving to Oak Ridge. HOA rules do not allow them now." "That is too bad," I replied. "You are welcome to stop by for eggs anytime." He laughed. "Do not let the board president hear you say that. She is on a crusade about keeping the neighborhood pristine. I swear she spends half her day patrolling with a clipboard looking for violations." I thought nothing of his comment at the time, but later that week, as I was installing a section of the electric fence, I noticed a woman standing at the edge of the subdivision. She wore designer exercise clothes and large sunglasses, her blonde hair pulled back in a perfect ponytail. Unlike the other residents, she did not wave or smile. She simply stood there, arms crossed, watching me work, through her binoculars. That evening, as the sun set over my newly fenced property, I sat on my porch feeling satisfied with my progress. The fence was complete, the chickens were secure in their coop, and soon I would be adding the goats I had arranged to purchase. I had no idea that the woman with the binoculars was about to shatter my peaceful existence. 3 sharp knocks echoed through my house, startling me from my Saturday morning coffee routine. I was not expecting anyone. The nearest store was 15 minutes away, and I had not ordered any deliveries. When I opened the front door, I found myself face to face with the blonde woman I had seen watching me from a distance. Up close, she was intimidating in a different way. Her makeup was flawless, her nails perfectly manicured, and a diamond tennis bracelet sparkled on her wrist. She wore what looked like designer athletic wear, though I doubted she had been exercising. The expression on her face was one of practiced superiority. "Are you the owner of this property?" she demanded, not bothering with introductions. "Yes, I am," I responded, surprised by her tone. Can I help you with something?" She gestured dramatically toward my new fence. That electrical monstrosity is a violation of neighborhood standards and needs to be removed immediately. I blinked, confused. "I am sorry, but this property is not part of your neighborhood. I do not belong to any HOA." "Excuse me." Her perfectly shaped eyebrows rose in apparent disbelief. "This entire area falls under Oak Ridge Estates guidelines. We do not allow electric fencing of any kind. It is an eyesore and a safety hazard." I took a deep breath, trying to remain calm. "No, that is incorrect. My property line ends 50 yards before Oak Ridge begins. I have the county records and deed to prove it. This land has never been part of your development." She pulled out her phone, tapping the screen with a long, glossy nail. "I have the HOA boundary map right here, and your property is clearly within our jurisdiction." "That map must be incorrect," I said firmly, growing increasingly uncomfortable with her aggressive stance. "I checked thoroughly before purchasing. My property is agriculturally zoned, separate from residential Oak Ridge." "Do you have any idea who I am?" she asked, her voice rising. "I am Diane Westfield, president of the Oak Ridge Estates Homeowners Association. I have been on the board for 8 years. I know exactly where our boundaries lie." "I understand you are in a position of authority in your neighborhood," I replied, trying to be respectful despite her condescending tone. "But my land is not part of Oak Ridge. The electric fence is both legal and necessary for my livestock. I have all the proper permits from the county." Her face flushed red. "Those permits were issued in error. Our HOA covenants supersede county regulations in matters of exterior modifications. That fence is coming down one way or another." "Look, Ms. Westfield." "It is Mrs. Westfield," she interrupted sharply. "Mrs. Westfield," I corrected myself. "I understand you have concerns, but I would be happy to show you the property line documentation and the county permits. There has clearly been a misunderstanding." She pulled her phone out again, this time appearing to take photos of my property and the fence. "The only misunderstanding is yours. This will be handled through proper channels. I suggest you start looking into fence removal services before you receive formal notice and fines begin to accumulate." Before I could respond, she turned on her heel and marched back to her luxury SUV parked at the edge of my driveway. The engine roared to life, and she sped away, leaving me standing bewildered in my doorway. I spent the rest of the morning digging out my property documents, double-checking the boundaries and permits. Everything confirmed what I already knew: my land was not part of Oak Ridge Estates. The HOA had no jurisdiction here, but something told me this was not going to be the end of it. That night I could not sleep. Mrs. Westfield's threat about proper channels kept replaying in my mind. I had sunk my life savings into this property, carefully budgeted for the renovations and animals. I could not afford a legal battle with a wealthy HOA, even if I was clearly in the right. As I finally drifted off to sleep, I tried to convince myself that once she reviewed the actual documents, she would realize her mistake and leave me alone. I was wrong, very wrong. 3 days after my confrontation with Mrs. Westfield, I was preparing dinner when red and blue lights began flashing through my windows. My stomach dropped as I stepped onto the porch and saw a police cruiser parked in my driveway. 2 officers approached, their expressions serious, hands resting near their belts. "Good evening, sir," the older officer said. "We have received multiple complaints about an illegal and dangerous electric fence on this property. We need to discuss this situation." My mouth went dry. Multiple complaints from whom? The younger officer consulted his notepad. Several residents of Oak Ridge Estates have reported a hazardous electric barrier that poses a danger to children, pets, and wildlife. They claim it violates both county safety codes and HOA regulations. "Officers, there must be some mistake," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I have all the proper permits for this fence. It is a standard agricultural electric fence, completely up to code. And more importantly, this property is not part of Oak Ridge Estates or subject to their HOA rules." The officers exchanged glances. "Do you have documentation to support that?" the older one asked. "Absolutely. Please come inside." I led them to my kitchen table where, thankfully, I had organized all my paperwork after Mrs. Westfield's visit. I handed them the property survey, deed, and county permits for the fence. The older officer studied the documents carefully while his partner radioed in to confirm the information. After several tense minutes, his shoulders relaxed visibly. "Everything appears to be in order," he said, returning my papers. "Your fence meets agricultural zoning requirements, and your property is indeed outside the Oak Ridge HOA boundaries." Relief washed over me. "Thank you for confirming that." As they prepared to leave, the older officer hesitated at the door. "Just so you know," he said quietly, "this likely will not be the end of it. Mrs. Westfield is persistent. She has considerable influence with county officials. I have responded to similar complaints before." "What do you mean?" I asked. He glanced at his partner, then back to me. "Let us just say she has a history of boundary disputes with properties bordering Oak Ridge. Document everything. Get a security camera if you can afford one." With that cryptic warning, they departed. That night I could not sleep. The officer's warning echoed in my mind. I pulled out my laptop and began researching Diane Westfield and the Oak Ridge Estates HOA. What I discovered disturbed me deeply. Local news archives revealed multiple lawsuits involving the HOA under Mrs. Westfield's leadership. The comment sections were filled with stories from former residents who had been pressured to sell or faced constant harassment over minor violations. One article mentioned a retired couple who had owned land adjacent to the subdivision, land that somehow became incorporated into Oak Ridge after the couple moved away due to health concerns. I found myself diving deeper, searching public records and property databases. A pattern emerged. Over the past 8 years, Oak Ridge Estates had expanded its boundaries 3 times, always absorbing adjacent properties that had previously been independent. In each case, the original owners had moved away after months of complaints, citations, and legal challenges. By 3 a.m., my kitchen table had become a war room. Printed maps showed the original Oak Ridge boundaries compared to current ones. Notes detailed the timeline of expansions, lists of former property owners I needed to contact, and most disturbing of all, connections between expansion areas and new construction projects handled by Westfield Construction Company, owned by none other than Richard Westfield, Diane's husband. This was never about my fence. This was about my land. I managed to track down Philip Lambert, who had owned a small orchard bordering Oak Ridge until 2 years ago. He agreed to speak with me by phone the next morning. "They made my life hell," he told me, his voice still angry after all this time. "First it was complaints about my tractor being visible from their streets. Then anonymous calls to the county about improper pesticide use, which was completely false. My trees were organic. When I would not sell, someone kept damaging my irrigation system. Police could never prove who did it." "How did it end?" I asked. "Water bill got so high I could not sustain it. Trees started dying. Then they offered me half what the property was worth, saying it was generous given the condition of the orchard. I had no choice. By the end of the day, I had spoken with 3 former property owners who shared similar stories. My property was clearly the next target in Oak Ridge's systematic expansion, and Diane Westfield was just getting started. A week after the first police visit, the cruiser returned. This time, I was prepared. As the same 2 officers approached my door, I noticed Mrs. Westfield's SUV parked down the road, just far enough away to observe without being obvious. "Good morning, officers," I greeted them calmly. "What seems to be the issue today?" The younger officer looked uncomfortable. "We have received updated information regarding your property boundaries. According to documents submitted by the Oak Ridge Estates HOA, your land does fall within their jurisdiction after all." He handed me a professionally prepared map with official-looking stamps. According to this document, my entire 5 acres had somehow been incorporated into Oak Ridge Estates years ago, despite being separated by a county road and having completely different zoning. "This is falsified," I said immediately. "My property is agriculturally zoned. Oak Ridge is residential. The county road between us is a legally designated boundary." "We understand your confusion," the older officer said, his tone suggesting he did not believe the document either. "But Mrs. Westfield has provided what appears to be authorized documentation." "Then let me provide you with the actual county records," I replied, retrieving my folder of documents. "These are the original property surveys, title history, and current deed. You can see the agricultural zoning designation has never changed. And here is the most recent county tax assessment, which clearly shows I do not pay HOA fees because I am not part of any association." The officers reviewed my documents, the younger one taking photos with his department phone. He stepped away to make a call while the older officer waited with me. "Between us," the older officer said quietly, "this is not the first time we have seen boundary disputes involving Oak Ridge, but this is the first time someone has been so well prepared." When the younger officer returned, his demeanor had changed. "County records confirm your documents are accurate. The map provided by Mrs. Westfield appears to be inconsistent with official records." "You mean fraudulent," I said flatly. The officer cleared his throat. "We cannot make that determination, but we will be filing a report about this discrepancy and forwarding it to the county assessor's office. In the meantime, your fence is confirmed to be legal and properly permitted." As they turned to leave, the older officer paused. "Sir, we are required to inform Mrs. Westfield that her complaint could not be verified. I suggest you stay inside for a while." From my window, I watched as the officers approached Mrs. Westfield's vehicle. Even from a distance, I could see her animated gestures and the red flush spreading across her face. When the police finally drove away, she remained in her SUV for several minutes, staring in the direction of my house before finally speeding off. The next week passed peacefully. I finished reinforcing the chicken coop and brought home the 3 goats I had been planning to adopt. Working with the animals was therapeutic, helping me push the boundary dispute to the back of my mind. When I ran into Tom from Oak Ridge while picking up feed at the farm supply store, he seemed impressed. "Heard you stood your ground with the HOA queen," he said with a grin. "Not many people do that and win." "I just showed the officers my documentation," I replied modestly. "Well, word is she was shut down at the last board meeting when she tried to authorize legal action against you. The HOA attorney told her your property is definitely not part of Oak Ridge. She did not take it well." I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. So it is over. She is accepting reality. Tom's expression turned serious. I would not count on it. Diane does not accept defeat easily, but at least the board is not backing her on this one. I wanted to believe the matter was resolved. For a few days, I allowed myself to relax and enjoy my little farm. No luxury SUVs parked nearby. No police visits. Just me, my animals, and the peaceful rural life I had worked so hard to achieve. Then came the text message that shattered my false sense of security. It was from a number I did not recognize with a photo attachment. When I opened it, my blood ran cold. The image showed Mrs. Westfield standing in what appeared to be a community center room. Behind her was a projected image of my house and property. The text read, "Thought you should know what happened at tonight's emergency Oak Ridge meeting. She is calling your fence a community hazard and showing photos of children near it. Not good." A second text followed. "This is Sandra from 2 streets over. Tom gave me your number. Many of us think this vendetta is wrong, but she has scared everyone into thinking you are endangering the neighborhood children." I enlarged the photo and studied the faces in the crowd. Concerned parents, angry neighbors, all focused on images of my property. A printout on the wall labeled Phase 4 Expansion showed my 5 acres parceled into housing lots. My peaceful victory had been an illusion. The battle had simply moved to a different battlefield, and I had not even known I was still at war. The attacks began gradually, then intensified with alarming speed. First came the animal control officers, arriving unannounced one Tuesday morning. "We have received multiple reports of neglected livestock on this property," the senior officer explained, looking genuinely uncomfortable with the situation. "I am required to investigate any such claims." I showed them around, introducing them to my well-fed goats and clean, spacious chicken coop. The younger officer took notes while the senior officer examined the animals. "These are some of the healthiest animals I have seen," he finally admitted. "Their living conditions exceed county requirements. I am sorry for the inconvenience, but we had to follow up on the complaints." "Complaints plural?" I asked. "How many were there?" He hesitated. 7 separate calls in the past 2 days, all anonymous. The next morning, I discovered the first act of vandalism. A 20-foot section of my electric fence had been cut, the wires snipped with precision. Not accidental damage, but deliberate sabotage. I repaired it immediately and began scanning the property line several times daily. 2 days later, my neighbor from the farmland side, Ed Miller, drove up in his truck. "Thought you should see this," he said, handing me a glossy flyer. "My wife found it in our mailbox." The professional-looking real estate listing showed my house and property offered at 30% below market value. "Motivated seller, all offers considered," it proclaimed in bold letters. It included my address and photos that must have been taken from the edge of my property. "I know you are not selling," Ed said. "This some kind of scam?" Before I could answer, a luxury sedan pulled into my driveway. An expensively dressed couple emerged, looking confused. "Is this 1425 County Line Road?" the man asked. "We are here to see the property. Our agent said the owner would be available for showings all day." After apologizing to the couple and explaining the situation, I called the real estate company listed on the flyer. They had no record of listing my property and were equally confused by the unauthorized use of their logo and formatting. The following day brought more prospective buyers and another act of vandalism. This time, my mailbox had been knocked over and my "no trespassing" signs removed. I replaced everything, adding a game camera hidden in a nearby tree. At the local grocery store, I made a disturbing discovery. Pinned to the community bulletin board was a petition with dozens of signatures. The heading read, "Protect our children from dangerous electric fencing." It described my legal agricultural fence as an unlicensed high-voltage hazard that had allegedly injured neighborhood pets and threatened local children. The claims were completely fabricated, but the signatures were real, concerned citizens responding to fictional dangers. I was photographing this petition when I heard a familiar voice behind me. Such a shame when one person refuses to consider the safety of the community. I turned to find Diane Westfield standing there, a shopping basket over her arm, her expression one of practiced concern. "These claims are false and you know it," I said quietly, conscious of other shoppers nearby. "My fence is standard agricultural fencing, properly installed and completely legal. I am simply responding to concerns from community members," she replied, her voice carrying just enough to attract attention. "Several pets have been injured. A child could be next." "No pets have been injured," I stated firmly. "That is a lie, and my property is clearly marked with warning signs as required by law." Her perfect smile never wavered. "It seems we have a difference of opinion on what constitutes public safety." "This is not about safety," I replied. "This is about you wanting my land." Something flickered in her eyes, surprised that I had figured out her true motive, perhaps, but she recovered quickly. "I have no idea what you are talking about." "I think you do, Mrs. Westfield. I have spoken to the previous owners of properties mysteriously absorbed by Oak Ridge Estates. I know about the pattern." She stepped closer, her voice dropping to a whisper. "You know nothing, but I will tell you this. All this unpleasantness could disappear if you would consider a reasonable offer for your property. Oak Ridge-approved developers would pay fair market value considering the deteriorating conditions. My property is not for sale." Her smile tightened. "Everything is for sale for the right price or under the right pressure." She glanced at her watch. "Do think about it. These community concerns about your dangerous fence could escalate, or they could simply disappear." With that, she turned and walked away, leaving me standing next to the petition filled with false claims. As she reached her SUV in the parking lot, I saw her make a phone call, laughing as she climbed inside. The message was clear. This was just the beginning. By the end of the week, I had dealt with 2 more interested buyers, another animal control visit, and found a section of fence cut again. But Mrs. Westfield had made a critical error in our grocery store confrontation. She had essentially admitted her true motives, and I now had a plan to fight back. I knew I needed evidence, and lots of it. The game camera I installed after the first vandalism incident was a start, but not enough. I withdrew money from my emergency savings and invested in a comprehensive security system, 6 high-definition cameras with night vision capability, positioned to cover my entire property line with Oak Ridge Estates. I made sure the cameras were visible enough to serve as a deterrent but secure enough to prevent tampering. It took only 3 days to capture useful footage. The first camera recorded Mrs. Westfield herself walking along my property line at dusk, examining my fence with a clipboard in hand, taking notes and photos. She was clearly trespassing, stepping several feet onto my land. The second camera caught a man I did not recognize cutting a section of my fence wire at 2 a.m. The third camera recorded Mrs. Westfield's SUV parked nearby during this vandalism, though she remained in the vehicle. Armed with this evidence, I contacted a lawyer who specialized in property disputes and HOA overreach, Patricia Chen. I found her through one of the former property owners who had eventually won a settlement in a different county after similar harassment. "This is quite a collection of evidence," Ms. Chen said as she reviewed my footage and documentation in her office. Trespassing, vandalism, false police reports, fraudulent real estate listings. Mrs. Westfield has been busy. Can we stop her? I asked. We can do better than that, Ms. Chen replied. But I want to understand the full picture. This level of fixation on your property seems extreme, even for an overzealous HOA president. There must be a stronger motivation. Following Ms. Chen's advice, I filed for public records related to county development plans in the area surrounding my property and Oak Ridge Estates. What we discovered was illuminating. A proposed commercial development, Oak Ridge Marketplace, had been submitted to county planning. The shopping complex would be built on land currently designated as Phase 4 of Oak Ridge Estates expansion, which, according to their map, included my 5 acres. The primary contractor listed for the project was Westfield Construction Company. Now it makes sense, Ms. Chen said, connecting the documents. Your land is the missing piece they need to complete this development. Based on these projections, the shopping complex would increase the value of existing Oak Ridge homes by at least 20%, and Westfield Construction stands to make millions on the project. So this was never about my fence, I said. The fence was just the excuse. This is about money, lots of it. With this knowledge, I expanded my investigation. Following Ms. Chen's guidance, I began reaching out to other property owners in the rural areas surrounding Oak Ridge Estates. Not just former owners who had been pushed out, but current residents who might be experiencing similar harassment. The response was overwhelming. I connected with 15 different property owners who reported encounters with Mrs. Westfield or anonymous complaints filed against them. Some had received lowball purchase offers. Others had experienced unexplained damage to fences, mailboxes, or outbuildings. All felt isolated in their struggles until now. We began meeting regularly, sharing documentation and evidence. One neighbor had installed security cameras after repeated vandalism and captured clear footage of Mrs. Westfield's husband examining their property line. Another had recorded a phone conversation with Mrs. Westfield, explicitly tying HOA compliance issues to making things easier if they sold their land to the preferred developer. Maps emerged with pins showing each incident, creating a damning pattern of targeted harassment surrounding all future expansion areas. Property records revealed that 6 separate parcels had been transferred to Oak Ridge-affiliated developers over the past decade, always following periods of complaints, code violations, and harassment. While building our case, I maintained my security vigilance at home. The cameras caught Mrs. Westfield trespassing 3 more times, always with her clipboard and measuring tools. Twice more, the mysterious man attempted to damage different sections of my fence, but was deterred by the visible cameras. Anonymous calls to animal control continued, but the officers now recognized the pattern and made only cursory, apologetic visits. Ms. Chen helped me file formal complaints with the county regarding the trespassing, vandalism, and false reports. We submitted the security footage as evidence, but held back our discoveries about the commercial development and pattern of harassment. That information would be our strategic reserve for the right moment. That moment arrived sooner than expected. A notice appeared in the local paper announcing a county planning commission meeting. The agenda included a special request from Oak Ridge Estates HOA regarding boundary adjustments and zoning changes for their Phase 4 expansion. "This is it," Ms. Chen told me over the phone. "They are making their official move for your property. They must believe you are close to breaking point." "What do we do?" I asked. "We prepare for battle," she replied, "and we bring everyone." The county meeting room was packed beyond capacity. Chairs had been added along the walls, and people stood in the back. In the front rows sat Mrs. Westfield and members of the Oak Ridge HOA board, along with a man I recognized from photos as Richard Westfield. They looked confident, occasionally turning to survey the crowd with satisfied expressions. What they did not expect was the composition of that crowd. Nearly every seat was filled with rural property owners from around Oak Ridge Estates, all the neighbors I had connected with over the past weeks. Each carried folders of documentation. Many wore the same expression of quiet determination I felt on my own face. The meeting began with standard procedures and minor agenda items. When they reached the Oak Ridge Estates boundary proposal, Mrs. Westfield approached the podium. Her presentation was polished and persuasive, speaking of community standards and unified development while displaying attractive renderings of the proposed Oak Ridge marketplace. "This commercial center will bring jobs and convenience to our growing community," she explained, gesturing to the colorful displays. "The Phase 4 expansion simply regularizes boundaries that have been irregularly defined for years." She never directly mentioned my property, instead referring to undeveloped parcels and non-conforming usage that needed to be brought into compliance. Her slideshow included distant photos of my fence, described as unsafe structures threatening neighborhood children. When the commission chairwoman asked for public comments, I was the first to approach the podium. Ms. Chen stood beside me with our presentation materials. "My name is redacted," I began, my voice steadier than I expected. "I own the 5-acre property at 1425 County Line Road, which appears to be included in what Mrs. Westfield calls the Phase 4 expansion, though no one from Oak Ridge has ever approached me directly about acquiring my land." I detailed the history of harassment, beginning with Mrs. Westfield's first visit and escalating through police calls, animal control reports, vandalism, and fraudulent real estate listings. Then came the evidence. On the large screen, security footage played showing Mrs. Westfield trespassing on my property, measuring distances, photographing my home. Another clip showed the fence-cutting incident with Mrs. Westfield's SUV visible in the background. "This is not about community standards or unsafe structures," I continued. "My fence is legal, properly permitted, and necessary for my agricultural use. This is about systematic harassment designed to force me to sell my property." Ms. Chen then presented the connection between the expansion plans and Westfield Construction Company's contract for the shopping complex. Gasps rippled through the audience as the conflict of interest became clear. "Mrs. Westfield has never disclosed that her husband's company stands to make millions from this development," Ms. Chen stated. "This represents a clear ethical violation of her position as HOA president and her representations to this commission." One by one, neighbors came forward with their own documentation of harassment, boundary disputes, and pressure tactics. The pattern became undeniable. What had seemed like isolated incidents formed a clear strategy of targeted expansion. The commission members' expressions changed from polite interest to growing concern. Several shuffled through the documents we had provided, whispering among themselves. When Mrs. Westfield attempted to respond, her usual composure had vanished. "These are baseless accusations from people who do not understand community development," she insisted, her voice rising. "The marketplace will benefit everyone, including these rural properties. Their values will increase significantly." "My client's property is not for sale at any price," Ms. Chen responded calmly. And based on county law, the HOA has no legal authority to force inclusion of properties outside its legitimate boundaries. After nearly 3 hours of testimony, the commission chairwoman called for a vote. The decision was unanimous. The boundary adjustment request was denied, and the matter of ethical violations and harassment would be referred to the County Ethics Committee and possibly the district attorney's office. Outside the meeting room, neighbors congratulated each other and exchanged contact information to stay connected. Mrs. Westfield and her husband exited quickly, avoiding eye contact as they hurried to their vehicle. The victory felt surreal. For weeks afterward, I kept expecting more incidents, more harassment. But the security cameras recorded only legitimate postal deliveries and wildlife passing through. No mysterious figures, no clipboard-carrying HOA presidents. 2 months later, I received formal notification that Diane Westfield had been removed from the Oak Ridge Estates HOA board pending investigation into ethics violations. The proposed marketplace development had been withdrawn, and the county had implemented new regulations requiring strict documentation of property boundaries for any proposed HOA expansion. I installed a new section of electric fence along the property line facing Oak Ridge, estates stronger and more visible than before, though still fully compliant with agricultural standards. It stood as a symbol not just of protection for my animals, but of boundaries maintained against those who would use power to take what was not theirs. On warm evenings, I still sit on my porch watching the sunset over my small farm. The goats graze peacefully in their pasture. Chickens peck contentedly in their yard. Occasionally, I see joggers or walkers from Oak Ridge pass by on the road. Many wave now, some even stop to chat. The fence that was meant to divide us has, ironically, helped build a stronger community of neighbors who understand the importance of respecting boundaries, both physical and ethical. And every time I see that fence glinting in the sunlight, I am reminded that sometimes standing your ground is not just about protecting property, but about defending something much more valuable: justice.